club, and the Chief Executive, Gary Pert, is with us. Gary, great to have you on Crunch Time. Welcome.
Hey, Jared.
When you and Simon Goodwin came into the SEN studio in the off-season, the coach said, I'm not going to be able to talk to you and convince you. We need to show you. What have we seen in Melbourne this year as you have fallen from finals contention?
And I think that it's talked about a lot, and I think it's really valid that when you go into these seasons, but I think Simon's talking over a longer period of time. So it's not like we're going to be guaranteeing to be back in the finals. That being said, we certainly had the ambitions to be resetting the program, back in the finals and playing a style of football that would win finals. So that's why we're disappointed. We understand why the supporters are disappointed, and in many ways, if you judge us by our behaviour, we haven't got there, and we understand the angst.
Is it a culmination, Gary, of years' worth of battling fires on too many fronts, and it's just exhausting inside the club and around the club? Is that a culmination of some of what we've seen this year?
Well, I think this year there has been a dynamic where I would call it distractions. There's been so much distraction where we look at what our pre-season was, where we had the incidents, obviously, with Joel Smith, and then we come off a final series where Angus Brayshaw was injured, managed to, in effect, resurrect his career and be able to be back playing, and then all of a sudden, just prior to the season starting, I've got to say it was probably one of the most emotional outcomes that I've seen at a club for the players, for everyone around the club when Gus had to retire. And that was how we started the season in that position. And as you've already talked about, we've had some ongoing legal issues over the last 3 years, which is a heavy distraction. And these aren't excuses. We still need to, as a club, be able to deal with this and perform on field. But it certainly made it hard. And then during the season, every team has injuries, and you've got to have the depth to be able to handle that. And in some ways, while we've blooded some really amazing young talent, we haven't been able to replace our real pillar talent and get the job done. And as a result, we're sitting in 13.
You were unequivocal coming into the season that this was the best culture that you'd seen in your 40 years in the game. Did you overstate that reality, Gary?
The context of that, as you would know, was about the fact we were being asked about the Joel Smith incident. Was that a reflection of the culture of the club, or was that a individual behavioural issue? And to me, it was a unprecedented incident at our club and an unprecedented incident within the AFL. Certainly was against all the values and behaviours and standards of our club. The accusations being made and still unfinalised. But to me, that's a behavioural issue, and it created, as you know, a huge distraction before the season started. And to have myself, Simon Goodwin, our captain, Max Gorn, having to deal with that rather than focus on the start of the season, it made it a really hard start to the season.
Is there, as a result of all of that, is there unrest? Are there unresolved issues within your player group, Gary, that will have to meet some sort of reckoning in this off-season?
Right at the moment, because I'm talking to players, I'm talking to coaches, there's a real disappointment, there's a real frustration. I'd be upset if there wasn't. Like, everyone's feeling that every year is a new opportunity to deliver and show what talent you've got in the group, and the fact that we're not going to be part of the final series, I'd expect that angst to be there. And, much publicised the conversations we're having with Christian Petrarca. He's frustrated. He had a brutal injury and had to cope with that physically and mentally. But really all the players are feeling an angst, but that needs to be turned into an energy to go, what are we going to do about it? What's going to be different for next year? How do we bounce back? How do we get back into the finals?
Is there a level of disgruntlement with Christian. So separate to the idea of being traded, is there, and does it owe to the off-season, does it owe to the injury and the way that was all handled in real time? Is there a true level of disgruntlement from Christian at the moment?
I'm not sure exactly with the question, but I'll take it that is he disgruntled with the injury and what played out afterwards, and I would say yes. Like I said, it was a brutal injury, and he had to go through a lot in the recovery. But as a club and also the AFL, we've reviewed how that played out, keeping in mind it was a game day, so you're at a stadium and you have other doctors and ambulance services, and we ended up in hospital. That's certainly been reviewed by all parties, and appropriate procedures and protocols were followed. But that still doesn't help in many ways the impact to not only Christian but his whole family. And right at the moment, physically and psychologically and emotionally, that's our focus, to be working with him, listening to him, and taking on board his views to go, how can we be better as a club next year? What do we need to do? And like I said, there'll be a cross-section of players consulted, and they all have slightly different views, and that's why we get a cross-section, and that's why we're able to then put in place the themes of what we need to work on to be better.
Do you think if he wasn't under a long-term contract, he would seek to leave you in the off-season?
Oh, I have no idea. You know, the hypotheticals of this, the conversations I'm having with Christian, they're not conversations about him breaking his contract or trading and how do we get trades done. This is a conversation about listening. How does the club need to be better? How can Christian's role be better? How can we do what's required and, again, be focused on getting back into playing to the levels? And we need to keep in mind, we understand the level of frustration. In many ways, that's because we've shown a lot of success over the last 3 or 4 years, and that's what raises the expectations of the players, everyone around the club, the supporters. I saw a statistic the other day, and this doesn't really help at the moment, but in the last 4 years, I think Brisbane's the only team to have won a couple of more games than us in the last 4-year period. So when we talk about culture and we talk about where the club's at, we must be doing some things right there, but at the same time, that doesn't make us feel comfortable. It just reminds us that we've got the talent in the group.
You've been in the game a long time, Gary.
We've got to make sure that when we put the programs around this talent, I think we've had distractions this year. I think we've lost some alignment, and that's going to be our challenge in the off-season to straighten that up and make sure that we can fulfil our potential next season.
You've been in the game a long time, Gary. You've seen many changes over a long period of time, 35, 40 years. From your experiences, though, now, with what you're saying, how do you galvanise not only the playing group but the whole club, fans, supporters, sponsors, members, to bring that energy back to what you want to expect as one of the main leaders at this club?
Yeah, and the answer to that is a lot of that will come out of our opportunity to go through that process at the end of the season to go, what's not working? We also need to establish what is working and double down on that. Like I said, that success that we've had over the last 4 years, including obviously the premiership, you've got to double down on what's working and what we've got. We've got to fix up what hasn't been right this year. We've also got to look at benchmarking of the teams that have ended up in the top 4 and the top 6. Is there something happening in the game and the game style that we need to be learning from and adapting to? And that's normally the case. Very rarely is there not something that comes out in the way you go about it. And then when we start making our supporters and people around the club feel proud again about the way we're performing and we're delivering success, it falls into place then as a club. So while it falls apart pretty quickly, it can rebuild really quickly as well. And I think for you guys that have played so much footy, you'd know a lot of that comes and is driven through the player leadership group as well. And, in many ways, that's at the heart of the reference of where our culture's at now, 40 years on. In my anticipation or my experience, is because while we used to have a scenario where there might be a captain and vice captain, and they were normally your best player, and they didn't really play a big role. We now have, over the years, we've been building these very sophisticated, empowered leadership groups that set the standards and disciplines, and they set value-based behaviours. They hold each other accountable on and off the field. They're constantly driving the performances, and a lot of what we do and what comes out of this season, the improvements, is going to be driven back through a leadership group led by Max Gawn and Jack Viney, who I've just got total faith will be able to rebuild that program.
And then that has to happen reasonably quickly, I would have thought, Gary, if you're looking to potentially recruit some players into your club, some experienced players from other clubs, and to, I suppose, in that player making that decision, they're not second-guessing a decision as well, because your leadership within your footy department is strong and on a path that can be explained to recruit as well.
Yeah, and some of that process has obviously already started, not so much with the players, but the benchmarking, and this will play out because we'll obviously communicate with supporters afterwards as we go through this process. Some of it actually started from halfway through the year, because quite often we might go through a bigger, more in-depth process at the end of every season, but we also start the process halfway through the year. Is there anything that we can be learning to make us better in the back end? But also, is there work that needs to be done earlier on in preparation for what plays out at the end of the season? And we've been benchmarking ourselves against some elite teams outside of the AFL already. And there's some components, not only about performance, but also the leadership and dynamic of elite clubs that we've been already exploring. So the supporters need to keep in mind these review processes happen every year. We did a review process after the 2021 premiership at a time when everyone was telling us how good we were going and how good our culture was. And we found that there was quite a lot that we still needed to improve and work on and develop if we wanted to keep on growing. So it happens every year, and it will continue to happen every year.
Gary, the last 3 years, you've made finals 2 of those years. You went out in straight sets in both of those years. You've finished, well, you're down at 13th at the moment. Is it possible that some of the tension and the frustration that you've talked about amongst the players, and particularly some of the senior guys, is that there seems to be a lot of sameness about it? There's some things that have been going on in terms of personnel and the way you've played, and the particularly in the forward half, that you haven't been able to fix. Is that where some of the frustration lies?
I think that's where the frustration might lie with supporters, that they haven't seen, for example, us able to get in the last few years a big key forward that is turning the game and delivering every week. And I think, that seems to be a constant theme that comes through. But rest assured, those final series, both of them, we were playing good enough footy to finish top 4 in both those seasons. Our forward lines were delivering scores, and our back lines were actually arguably the best in the competition, or close to it, for a period of time. So there was a lot of good things happening. And like I said, it's been mentioned before that in both those final series we had really substantial injuries coming into the finals and during the finals. But we just need to have the depth. We need to have the flexibility, because every team has to be able to cope with that. Otherwise, you're too vulnerable in that regard.
So when I look at the list now, this year's been an opportunity to play Windsor and Tholstrup and Moniz Wakefield and Woden and Brown. There's been a whole lot of young players that have been invested in. Do you go out and are you still looking to bring more experienced players in, or the fact that you've been up for a couple and now it's down, is it now the time you've got to keep investing in those younger players for the next wave?
We definitely have to keep on investing, and all of those players, we've had 5 debutants. They've all played. A lot of them have played quite a bit of footy this year. In some ways, they've probably played more than ideally what we would have liked in their first year, but they were actually having to replace, the early loss of Angus Brayshaw caused a shuffle. The loss of not only you've got, a Petrarca towards the end of the year, but we've had injuries to our midfield and forward line throughout the year, and they probably ended up playing more footy. But we're still in a period where when we reset, we get our injured players back. Clayton Oliver's had a difficult year this year, and a lot of that has come off the back of a badly broken hand, and had to play this season with a plate in his hand, which has made things difficult. All that means is we've now got the opportunity to reset. We've got the opportunity also to look at that forward line, which seems to be something. It's an ingredient that we have to get right if we're going to be a serious threat again in the finals next year.
Gary, it's Sam Edmund here. Appreciate your time. Just a couple of personnel ones, if you don't mind. Like, when you've got a player like Dan Houston seemingly changing his mind and wanting to get to your club, what level of concern sits behind that in terms of how, I guess, outsiders might view the organisation?
Oh, look, Dan's obviously a contracted player at another club, so I'm not going to talk about any players from other clubs. Suffice to say, I think at this time of the year and also over the next few weeks, we're talking to a lot of player managers about the sort of players that we would like to bring into our program. And I'm sure there's lots of other clubs looking at our players. We've got a lot of talented players as well. The industry, that's what plays out over the next couple of months. And I would prefer that we weren't having this sort of publicity while those players were looking at our club, because I'm very conscious of the external presentation compared to if you're talking to a Max Gawn and you're talking to a Jack Viney and you're talking to the players that live within our program now. They have a very different view on how solid the programs are and what the potential of this player group is. And like I said, once we get through the next period of time and we sit down and we start planning for next year, it starts to become exciting again about what that potential is, because the one thing that we've got and hasn't changed is we've still got a very talented list, which I think everyone is if it all stays fit and we're playing at our best, is capable of getting back into the finals.
You mentioned Jack Viney. Will he stay, Gary?
Yep. I've got, Jack's couldn't be more blue and red demon. I expect him to be playing next year. His last game, he's heart and soul for the club.
And Alex Neal-Bullen, I guess, putting in a trade request to Simon Goodwin and then maintaining a spot in the side over the last 4 weeks is something we don't see, or at least we don't hear that often. What sat in and behind that? And he's been a good player for you for a long time. I wonder what you'd hold out in terms of an exchange.
Yeah, I think sometimes teams in the last week or two, if they can't make the finals, mightn't play players that have asked for a trade because they're either angry or disappointed or trying to make a statement. For Alex Neal-Bullen, when he told the players about the fact this is not and again I'll be sensitive the way I talk about it. This is something that has to play out for his family. We're supportive of that. We've been across it for a long time. He's someone that's given everything to this club for 10 years. He had 100% support from the coaches, his teammates, everyone around the club. We're certainly not going to be trying to make any statement against Alex. In fact, quite the opposite. I would love to think that the players really try and make sure that it's a really successful last couple of games and we finish the year with momentum in a lot of ways as a bit of a send-off.
Gary, so as we conclude, is what responsibility rests with yourself as Chief Executive and the President to bring some of the off-field distractions, as you would describe them, to a close? The unexploded grenade of the previous President, Senate inquiries, lawsuits. How much responsibility sits with you to try to get those off the table and get them out of the Melbourne atmosphere before the start of the new season, rather than bobbing to the surface like the body in the lake over the past couple of years?
And Jared, I think that is nearly the ultimate question, certainly for me, and one that has made it probably the most frustrating year for me as a CEO, because I would love to think that for things like the legal action taken by the ex-president, it's got nothing to do with me. In fact, it's got nothing to do with the board in terms of the actions being taken, and you're forced to defend it. And these things, the legal system plays out for years, and I literally couldn't even tell you where it was at the moment because I don't get involved. It's to do with the board, it's to do with the lawyers. But yes, it does constantly create this cloud. Then you look at things like the Joel Smith scenario where that blows up and we don't get any involvement in the process. We can't solve it. We can't rectify it. I have no idea when that's going to be concluded or what the outcome. We get no updates as part of the process. So, again, we've got to deal with the media attacks that come from around it without any way to conclude it. And I think the one I've already said it, the one that I think had the biggest emotional impact on the whole club. Because of the person, and I think because of the way it played out, and I think the way it was dealt with was the Angus Brayshaw retirement, injury and retirement. Again, another thing that as a CEO, I can't do anything about. And I think that's why our focus has to be right now about what can we change, what can we deal with, what can we set up for next year to make sure that we get the momentum and the alignment back? And my role's all about alignment of the club. Get that momentum and alignment back. Once we start winning football games, a lot of that stuff becomes irrelevant and hopefully very quickly.
Gary, we appreciate your time. Thank you. I know you're due in the function, so thank you for indulging all our questions.
Thanks, guys.
Want to see more from the Ds? And don't forget to subscribe up here.